Daniel and Sara didn't fall in love. They decided on it. They talked about marriage the way other people talked about business partnerships, rationally, carefully, with full awareness of what they were choosing and why. No grand gestures. No irrational certainty. Just two intelligent people making an intelligent choice. It made perfect sense. And that was the problem. This is a story about what happens when you choose wisely and lose anyway. If that tension feels familiar, stay with StoryQuell. Daniel met Sara at a professional development seminar 3 years ago. She was the kind of person who arrived early, sat in the second row, and asked clarifying questions that made presenters think harder about their own material. He noticed her because she didn't perform her competence, she simply had it. They started talking during a break. Not flirting. Talking. About career trajectories. About the difference between ambition and desperation. About how exhausting it was to date people who mistook intensity for depth. "I think I'm tired of auditions," she said during their third dinner together, 2 months later. "Every date feels like I'm supposed to prove something. Or discover something," Daniel added. "Like there's some hidden spark that's supposed to ignite if you just find the right person, say the right thing." "Exactly." She looked at him with something like relief. "I don't think I believe in that anymore." "Me neither." It wasn't cynicism. It was something closer to clarity. They dated for 18 months before the conversation happened. Not the conversation. They'd been having versions of it for weeks. But the one where things became explicit. They were in his apartment. Sara was reading on the couch, her legs tucked under her, and Daniel was at the table going through a contract revision. The television was off. The silence between them wasn't empty. "I've been thinking," Sara said, not looking up from her book. About what we're doing." Daniel set down his pen, not alarmed. Attentive. She closed the book but kept her finger between the pages, as if she might need to retreat into it. "I like this. What we have. I don't feel like I'm performing. I don't feel like I'm waiting for you to disappoint me. I feel the same way. And I know that's not the story we're supposed to want. It's supposed to be overwhelming. Irrational. The kind of thing that makes you rearrange your life." Daniel nodded slowly. "But we've both seen how that ends." "We have." She opened the book again, then closed it. A small negotiation with herself. "My sister called yesterday. She's getting divorced. Second one." She said she followed her heart both times. Sara's voice didn't carry judgment, just observation. "And now she's 41 and starting over, and she said she wished, just once, she'd used her head." Daniel came to sit beside her. Not touching, but close. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think we could make a good life together. A real one. Based on actual compatibility, not just," she gestured vaguely, "chemicals." "Partnership," Daniel said. "Yes, partnership." He let the word settle between them. It felt solid, unglamorous, honest. "I don't think I'm ever going to feel the way people describe in songs," Sara continued. "That kind of obsession. And I used to think that meant something was wrong with me. But maybe it just means I know what I actually need. Which is someone steady, someone smart, someone who isn't going to wake up one day and decide they need to find themselves in Guatemala or," she smiled, a little sadly, "chase some feeling they can't even name." Daniel thought about his own history. The relationship that had consumed him at 27, that had felt like the center of the universe until it collapsed under the weight of its own intensity. The aftermath had taught him something. Passion was easy to mistake for substance. "I think you're right," he said finally. "I think we could be happy. Not deliriously happy," Sara clarified, "but actually happy. The kind that lasts." "The kind that lasts," he repeated. They got engaged 3 months later. Small dinner with friends, no theatrics, no choreographed proposal. Sara wore a simple ring they'd chosen together. When people asked how he'd proposed, Daniel would say, "We just decided," and Sara would add, "It made sense." Some friends seemed disappointed by the lack of story. Others nodded with recognition. especially the ones over 35 who'd been through their own romantic disasters. Daniel's brother called him 2 days after the announcement. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes." "You don't sound excited." "I sound certain." "There's a difference." His brother was quiet for a moment. "Okay, as long as you know what you're choosing." "I do." "We both do." And he believed it. Sara was intelligent, capable, and kind. She understood him without needing him to be more interesting than he was. She didn't require grand gestures or constant reassurance. Their fights, rare, ended in conversation, not tears. They wanted the same things: stability, respect, a home that felt like a refuge rather than a stage. It felt like the first adult decision he'd ever made. The wedding was in April. 60 people, mostly family, a few close friends. Sara wore a dress she actually liked, not one that would photograph well. Daniel's vows were honest without being vulnerable. "I promise to be your partner, to choose you deliberately, to build something that lasts." When Sara said hers, she looked directly at him. "I promise not to need you to be someone you're not, to respect what we've built, to choose this every day because it makes sense." The word "sense" hung in the air. A few people shifted in their seats. His mother looked concerned. Sara's father nodded slightly, approvingly. At the reception, one of Sara's friends cornered Daniel near the bar. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you love her?" It should have been an easy question. "Yes," he said. "I do." "Okay." The friend studied him. "You just don't look like you're in love." "What does that look like?" She smiled, but there was something pitying in it. "I don't know." Less composed. Daniel didn't know how to explain that composition was the point, that they'd both had enough of being undone by feeling, that what they'd built was better than that, more durable, more real. He found Sara later, during a quiet moment before the cake was cut. She was fixing her hair in the mirror of the venue's hallway. "Your friend asked if I love you." Sara met his eyes in the reflection. "What did you say?" "I said yes." She turned around. "Do you? Don't you?" She considered this. "I think so. It's just different than I expected love to feel." "Different how?" "Quieter," she said. "Less. Less." The words sat between them like a stone. "But maybe that's better," she added quickly. "Maybe that's how it's supposed to feel when it's real." Daniel wanted to believe her. He did believe her. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe that's exactly what it is." They kissed. It was warm, affectionate, appropriate. And when they pulled apart, neither of them looked uncertain. They looked decided. They bought a house in October, 6 months after the wedding. Not the house Sara had circled in listings with the bay windows and the breakfast nook, but one that made financial sense. Good bones. Reasonable commute. A neighborhood that was appreciating. Daniel stood in the empty living room on move-in day, listening to the echo of their voices bounce off bare walls, and felt something close to accomplishment. Sara was in the kitchen, measuring the counter space with her phone, already planning where things would go. "This is good," she said when she found him. "This is a good start." He agreed. It was. Their first year of marriage had a rhythm to it. Weekday mornings, they moved around each other efficiently, shower schedules staggered, coffee made in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just functional. Sara left first. Daniel followed 20 minutes later. Evenings, they'd reconvene. She'd ask about his day. He'd ask about hers. The answers were detailed enough to feel like sharing, brief enough not to burden. "Jenkins is pushing back on the timeline again." "Of course he is." "Did you show him the projections?" "I will tomorrow." "Good." Dinner was something they'd gotten good at, not cooking elaborate meals, but coordinating them. Monday was pasta. Wednesday was stir-fry. Friday they ordered in. It wasn't passion. It was system, and the system worked. In December, they hosted their first dinner party. Sara's idea. 4 couples, people from both their professional circles, the kind of evening that served dual purposes, social and strategic. Daniel watched Sara move through the evening like she was conducting an orchestra. She remembered everyone's dietary restrictions, steered conversations away from politics, laughed at the right moments. She was good at this. He was adequate. "You two seem really solid," one of the guests said to him while Sara was in the kitchen. "How long have you been together?" 3 years total. Married for 8 months. Still in the honeymoon phase then. Daniel smiled noncommittally. The honeymoon phase suggested a fever that would break. What they had felt more like equilibrium. Later, after everyone left, Sara sat on the couch removing her earrings. "That went well. You were great." "We were great," she corrected. "You talked to Martin about the merger for 20 minutes. That could be useful." He hadn't thought of it as useful. He'd thought of it as conversation. But she was right. It could be useful. "Are you happy?" he asked. She looked at him, surprised by the question. "Yes." "What?" "Just checking." "Are you?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied, and went to brush her teeth. Their first anniversary came in April. They went to dinner at a restaurant with white tablecloths and wine they had to pretend to understand. Sara wore a dress Daniel had seen before, but still looked nice in. He'd bought her a necklace, simple, elegant, the kind of thing you bought when you knew someone's taste without knowing their desires. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. He'd also gotten a card. Sara read it at the table, smiled, tucked it back in the envelope. "Thank you." "What did it say?" he asked. She looked confused. "You wrote it." "I know. But what did it say to you?" She pulled it out again, read it silently. "It says that you appreciate me, that you're glad we chose this." That was what he'd written. He'd meant it when he wrote it. But hearing it reflected back felt strangely hollow, like looking at a technically correct equation that somehow missed the point. "Are we okay?" Sara asked. "Yes, of course. You seem distant tonight." "I'm not. I'm here." She reached across the table and took his hand. Her palm was warm, her grip firm. "We're doing well, Daniel. Better than most people." "I know. So let's enjoy it." He squeezed her hand back. She was right. They were doing well. He was being neurotic. When they got home, they had sex. It was familiar, considerate, efficient. Afterward, Sara fell asleep with her hand on his chest, and Daniel stared at the ceiling, trying to identify what felt wrong when nothing actually was. Summer arrived. Sara's promotion came through in June. Director of Operations. She'd been angling for it for 2 years. Daniel took her out to celebrate. She talked through the entire meal about the new responsibilities, the team she'd be building, the challenges she was excited to face. He listened, asked good questions, felt proud of her. "This is what I wanted," she said at one point, her eyes bright with something he rarely saw there. Excitement. Actual pleasure. "You earned it." "We did," she said. "I couldn't have focused on this if I was worried about everything else. Having you, having this," she gestured between them. "It gives me the foundation to do the work." He understood what she meant. He felt the same way. Their marriage was the stable platform from which they could each pursue their ambitions without drama or distraction. But there was something about being described as a foundation that made him feel more structural than human. They took a vacation in August. Sara's choice. A resort in Mexico, all-inclusive, the kind of place where you didn't have to make decisions. Other couples there seemed to radiate a kind of ease Daniel couldn't locate in himself. One afternoon, lying by the pool, Sara was reading a thriller. Daniel was reading a biography of a tech entrepreneur. A couple near them were in the water, the woman laughing as the man lifted her, her arms around his neck, both of them unself-conscious in their delight. Sara glanced up from her book. "They're on their honeymoon." "How do you know?" "I asked earlier." 3 days in. They watched for another moment. The couple kissed, still in the water, and Daniel felt something he couldn't name. Not jealousy exactly. More like confusion, as if he were watching someone speak a language he'd studied but never quite become fluent in. "We weren't like that," Sara said quietly. "No. Does that bother you?" He thought about it honestly. "I don't know. Does it bother you? Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like. To be that, unguarded. You don't think we're unguarded? She looked at him then, really looked. No, I don't think we are. They sat with that for a while. The couple in the pool had moved on to ordering drinks from the swim-up bar. But maybe that's okay, Sara added. Maybe being guarded is just being smart. Maybe. That night, they had dinner at the resort's nicest restaurant. Sara ordered wine. They talked about work, about the house renovations they were considering, about whether they should get a dog. Are you happy? Daniel asked for the second time in their marriage. Sara set down her fork. Why do you keep asking me that? I want to make sure. I'm content, Daniel. I feel secure. Isn't that the same thing? Is it? She studied him across the candlelight. What do you want me to say? The truth. The truth is I don't wake up floating on air. I don't feel like I'm in a movie. But I also don't cry myself to sleep or wonder if I made a mistake. We have a good life. We're good partners. That's more than most people get. Everything she said was correct. He knew it was. So why did it feel like they were defending something instead of enjoying it? You're right, he said. Then stop worrying. He tried. He really did. Fall came. They settled back into their routines. Work, dinner, television, sleep. Weekends they ran errands, saw friends, maintained the life they'd constructed. One Saturday in November, they painted the guest bedroom. Sara had chosen a color called morning fog, a gray blue that looked different depending on the light. They worked in comfortable silence, rollers moving in steady rhythm. I think we're good at this, Sara said at one point. Painting, being married, being a team. Daniel looked at the wall, half finished, perfectly even. Yeah, we are. And they were. Every objective measure said so. They didn't fight. They didn't resent each other. They functioned. But standing there, roller in hand, paint speckling his forearms, Daniel had a thought he immediately tried to suppress. This is all it's going to be. Not a complaint. Just a fact. The life they'd chosen, the one that made sense, the one that worked, this was its ceiling. There would be no surprises, no transformations, no moments that split time into before and after. Just this. Morning fog. A color that looked different depending on the light, but was always, ultimately, the same shade of gray. Sara finished her section and stepped back to admire it. Perfect, she said. Daniel nodded. It was. The interruption arrived in January, in the form of a project Daniel didn't want. His firm was consulting for a nonprofit, pro bono work that was supposed to be good for optics. Daniel had been assigned to interface with their communications team. He'd tried to pass it to someone junior, but his manager had been insistent. It's 2 months, maybe 3. Makes us look good. Just do it. The nonprofit's office was in a converted warehouse downtown, the kind of space with exposed brick and mismatched furniture that was supposed to signal authenticity. Daniel arrived for the first meeting 15 minutes early and was directed to a conference room that smelled like coffee and old books. She walked in 7 minutes later. Sorry, back to back all morning. She was juggling a laptop, a water bottle, and a folder that was shedding papers. You're Daniel? Yes. Mira. She set everything down in a controlled avalanche. Thanks for doing this. I know pro bono isn't exactly thrilling for you guys. He gave a diplomatic answer about the firm's commitment to social good. She smiled like she knew it was bullshit but appreciated the effort. The meeting was supposed to last an hour. It lasted 90 minutes because Mira kept asking questions that forced him to reconsider his initial proposals. Not combatively. She was just genuinely interested in whether things would actually work versus just look good on paper. What about reach? She asked at one point. Your timeline assumes we can get in front of local media, but you're not accounting for how slow they are to respond to pitches from organizations like ours. She was right. He hadn't accounted for that. I'll adjust it, he said. I'm not trying to be difficult. You're not. You're being realistic. That's better. She smiled. A real smile, not a professional one. Okay, good. When the meeting ended, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Interested. Not in her, in the work. At least that's what he told himself. The second meeting was a week later. Mira showed up on time, more organized, wearing a sweater with a coffee stain on the cuff that she noticed halfway through and tried to hide. "I have a 2-year-old, she said, though he hadn't asked. "Everything I own has some kind of mark on it. You have a kid and a husband, both disasters in their own way." She said it lightly, the way people do when they're joking but also not joking. Then, catching herself, "That sounded worse than I meant it." "They're great. Just chaotic." Daniel nodded. He didn't know what to say to that. Sara had mentioned kids once or twice. In the abstract, the way you mention a possible vacation destination you're not committed to visiting. They went through the revised proposal. Myra's questions were sharper this time, her feedback more direct. She pushed back on 2 of his assumptions and was right both times. "You're good at this," he said. "At ruining your plans. At knowing what actually matters." She looked at him for a beat longer than necessary. "Thanks. Actually, thank you. My boss doesn't always think so." There was something in her voice. Frustration, maybe. Or fatigue. "Why not?" "Because I asked too many questions. Because I pushed back. Because I'm not just grateful to have a seat at the table." She stopped herself. "Sorry. You don't need to hear this. It's fine. It's not professional. We're not in court." She laughed, a surprised, genuine sound. "No, I guess we're not." The meetings became weekly, then twice a week. The project was expanding in scope, which Daniel suspected Mira was engineering, though he couldn't prove it. He didn't mind. He started preparing more for their meetings than he did for his actual clients. Not because the stakes were higher, but because he wanted to have better answers when she asked her questions. He wanted to impress her, though he wouldn't have used that word. In February, they met at a coffee shop instead of her office. Her idea, she needed to get out of the building, she said. She was there first, at a corner table, typing rapidly on her laptop. "Crisis?" he asked, sitting down. "Minor fire. Already out." She closed the laptop. "How are you?" It was a normal question. People asked it 100 times a day. But the way she asked it, like she actually wanted to know, made him pause. "Fine. Good." "You hesitated." "Did I?" For a second. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe. Or recognition. "Just tired," he said. "Of the project?" "No. Just in general." She nodded slowly. "I get that." They worked for an hour, then another. At some point, the conversation drifted. She told him about her son, about how he'd started saying why to everything, how exhausting and delightful it was. He told her about the house renovations, about Sara's promotion. "She sounds impressive," Mira said. "She is. And you're happy?" There it was again. That question. "Yes," he said automatically. Mira looked at him the way she looked at his proposals, like she was checking the math. But she didn't push. "Good. That's good." March brought warmer weather. They took a meeting outside, walking through a park near her office because Mira said she'd been trapped in conference rooms all week and couldn't bear another one. They walked slowly, discussing messaging strategies, target demographics. But Daniel found himself distracted by incidental things. The way she gestured when she was making a point, the way she'd stop walking entirely when she was thinking hard about something. "Do you like it?" she asked at one point. "The strategy?" "Your job. The work you do." No one had asked him that in years. "I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked." He thought about it. "I used to. Or I thought I did. Now it just feels like something I do." That's honest. Maybe too honest. No such thing. She looked at him then, and something in her expression made him aware of the space between them, how small it was, how easily it could get smaller. He stepped back slightly, pretending to check his phone. "I should get back," he said. "Right? Of course." She sounded normal. Nothing had happened. Nothing had even almost happened. But on the drive home, Daniel felt something he recognized from years ago, from before Sara, from relationships he'd convinced himself he'd outgrown. the specific anticipation of seeing someone again. Not because you needed to, but because you wanted to. It felt dangerous. It felt alive. The project was supposed to wrap in March. It didn't. There were delays, revisions, additional phases. Daniel told Sara it was taking longer than expected. She barely reacted. She was deep in her own work, preparing for a board presentation. "That's fine," she said. "Whatever you need to do." He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt guilty for feeling relieved. April arrived. The meetings continued. Daniel started noticing things he shouldn't. The way Mira pulled her hair back when she was concentrating, the way her voice changed when she talked about her son versus when she talked about her work, the way she listened, actually listened, like his words mattered beyond their utility. One Thursday afternoon, they were in her office, alone, reviewing final materials. Mira was leaning over his shoulder to see his laptop screen. He could smell her shampoo, something citrus, something that made him think of summer even though it was barely spring. "This is good," she said quietly. "This is really good, Daniel." He turned slightly. She was closer than he'd realized. Close enough that he could see the small scar above her eyebrow. Close enough that if either of them shifted even slightly, it would mean something. She stepped back. "I should." She gestured vaguely toward her desk. "Email. So much email. Right?" "Yeah." That night, lying next to Sara, Daniel couldn't sleep. Not because anything had happened. Because nothing had, and he'd wanted it to. That wanting felt like betrayal. That wanting felt like waking up. In May, the project finally concluded. Their last meeting was brief, professional. Mira thanked him. He thanked her. They shook hands like colleagues who'd completed a successful collaboration. "It was good working with you," she said. "You too. Maybe we'll cross paths again." Maybe. But they both knew the project was over. The excuse for contact was gone. Daniel walked to his car feeling something he couldn't name. Not quite loss. Not quite relief. He drove home. Sara was making dinner, something on the stove that smelled like garlic and wine. She kissed him when he came in. A quick, familiar peck. "How was your day?" "Good." "Project's done." "The nonprofit thing?" "Yeah." "Good. Now you can focus on actual work." She meant it kindly. She meant it practically. But all Daniel could think was, that was actual work. That was the first thing in years that had felt actual. He didn't say it. Instead, he helped with dinner. They ate. They talked about her day. They watched television. And Daniel tried very hard not to think about citrus shampoo, or questions that required real answers, or the way someone else had looked at him like he was more than just functional. He tried. But the interruption had already happened. And some doors, once opened, don't fully close. Sometimes nothing happens. And somehow, everything changes. If this moment feels familiar, the wanting you never acted on, you're not listening alone. Stay with the story. Daniel deleted her number in June. Not dramatically. Not after a moment of temptation or a close call. He did it on a Tuesday morning while waiting for his coffee to brew, scrolling through his contacts, seeing her name, and recognizing it as a problem. The project was over. There was no reason to keep it. His thumb hovered over the delete button for longer than it should have. Then he pressed it, and she was gone from his phone, and he felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Sara walked into the kitchen, already dressed for work. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just woke up." She accepted this. She poured her coffee, checked her phone, kissed him on the cheek. "I have back-to-back meetings until 4. Don't wait for dinner if you're hungry." "Okay." She left. The house settled into its usual morning silence. Daniel stood at the counter, holding his phone, feeling like he'd accomplished something and lost something in the same gesture. He tried to return to normal, to the rhythm he and Sara had established, the one that worked. But now he noticed things he'd trained himself not to see. The way Sara greeted him when he came home, friendly but distracted, already thinking about the next thing on her list. The way their conversations had efficient endpoints, natural places where they both understood the topic was complete and there was no reason to continue. The way she touched him, casually, affectionately, but never with urgency, never like she couldn't help herself. He'd thought these things were features, signs of maturity, of a relationship that didn't need constant performance. Now they felt like evidence. One evening in late June, Sara was working on her laptop at the dining table. Daniel was reading, or pretending to read, on the couch. "Do you think we talk enough?" he asked. She looked up, confused. "What? I mean, do you think we communicate well?" "Yes." "What?" "I don't know. Just wondering." She studied him for a moment. "Did something happen?" "No." "Then where is this coming from?" He couldn't answer honestly. "Just thinking. We're fine, Daniel. We've always been good at communication." She said it with certainty, the way she said things that were factually true. Then she returned to her screen. He watched her for a moment longer. The way her face looked in the laptop's glow. Competent. Composed. Content. He wanted to ask, "Are you happy? Really happy? Or are you just satisfied with the deal we made?" But he didn't, because he was afraid of what she'd say. Or worse, afraid she'd ask him the same question. July was hot. They barely saw each other. Sara's project had a tight deadline. Daniel was slammed with client work. They communicated mostly through texts, running late. "8 already. Don't wait up." It should have been fine. They'd had busy periods before. But Daniel found himself resenting the efficiency of it. The way they could coordinate an entire life through short, practical messages. No mess. No need for actual presence. One Saturday, Sara was working from home. Daniel suggested they take a break, go for a walk, get out of the house. "I really can't," she said, gesturing at her laptop. "This is due Monday. It's 1 hour." "Daniel, I don't have an hour. When was the last time we did anything together that wasn't planned or necessary?" She looked at him, surprised by the edge in his voice. "What's going on with you?" "Nothing. I just miss you. I'm right here." "Are you?" The question landed badly. He could see it in her face, the confusion, then the defense mechanisms activating. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You know this is a critical phase for my career. You said you understood." "I do understand." "Then why are you making me feel guilty?" "I'm not trying to." But he was. Or he wanted to. He wanted some reaction that proved she felt his absence the way he felt hers. Except he wasn't even sure he felt her absence. Maybe he just felt absence in general, and it was easier to blame her schedule than examine what was actually missing. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. I'm being unfair." She softened slightly. "We'll do something next weekend." "Okay. I promise." "Okay." She came over, kissed the top of his head, then returned to her laptop. Daniel went for a walk alone. Next weekend arrived. Sara kept her promise. They drove to the coast, spent the day at the beach. She was present, attentive, clearly making an effort. They had lunch at a restaurant overlooking the water. Couples around them seemed to radiate an ease Daniel couldn't locate in his own body. "This is nice," Sara said, reaching across the table for his hand. "Yeah. You seem distant." "I'm here. Physically." She was watching him carefully. "Where are you mentally?" He wanted to say, "I'm trying to figure out if I made a mistake. If we made a mistake. If choosing the smart thing was actually the most foolish thing either of us could have done." Instead, he said, "Just tired. You're always tired lately. Work has been a lot." "Is that all it is?" The question hung there. An opening. An opportunity to tell the truth. But what was the truth? That he'd felt something for someone else. That nothing had happened, but everything had changed. That he'd looked at their marriage and suddenly seen its borders, its limits, its careful construction. "That's all it is," he said. Sara held his gaze for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay." But he could tell she didn't believe him. August brought their second anniversary. Sara made reservations at the same restaurant as last year. Daniel bought her earrings. She bought him a watch. They exchanged gifts over dinner, smiled, toasted to 2 years. We're doing well, Sara said, the same thing she'd said last year. Are we? She set down her wine glass. What do you want me to say, Daniel? I want you to tell me if you're happy. I've told you that I am. You've told me you're content. That's different. Not to me it isn't. Well, maybe it should be. The words came out sharper than he intended. Sara's expression shifted. Hurt, then anger, then something colder. What is this really about, she asked. It's about whether we're actually happy or whether we're just going through motions we agreed to. We chose this, Daniel. Together. We both knew what we were signing up for. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I thought I did, but what? You met someone. The accusation landed like a slap. No. Then what changed? Everything. Nothing. He didn't know how to explain it. I just think maybe we settled, he said quietly. Sara's face went very still. Settled. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? I think we chose what made sense instead of what we actually wanted. What I wanted, Sara said carefully, was a partner. Someone stable and smart and decent. That's what I chose. Are you telling me that's not what you wanted? It was. It is. Then I don't understand what's changed. He didn't know how to make her understand. How to explain that you could choose something with your whole rational mind and still feel the ghost of what you'd chosen against. How the absence of chaos wasn't the same as the presence of joy. Never mind, he said. Forget it. Daniel, I'm just tired. You're right. We're doing well. I'm being stupid. But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness. They went home. They didn't have sex. Sara fell asleep, facing away from him. Daniel lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling the weight of everything he couldn't say pressing down on his chest. September was worse. They were polite to each other, functional, but there was a new caution in how they moved around each other, like they were both aware of something fragile that neither wanted to name. Sara stopped asking if he was okay. Daniel stopped trying to explain what he couldn't articulate. One evening, they were sitting in the living room, both on their laptops. The silence between them felt different now. Not comfortable, just empty. Do you ever think about what it would have been like? Daniel asked suddenly. Sara didn't look up. What would have been like? If we'd chosen differently. If we'd married people we were actually in love with. Now she looked up. Her expression was unreadable. I am in love with you. Are you? Yes. Maybe not the way movies show it. But yes. What if the way movies show it is real? What if we're missing something that actually exists? Sara closed her laptop slowly. Do you want out? No. Then what do you want? I don't know. That's not good enough, Daniel. I need you to figure it out. What if I can't? She looked at him for a long time. He could see her thinking, calculating, trying to find the rational path through this. Then we have a problem, she said finally. October arrived. The leaves changed. The temperature dropped. Daniel and Sara existed in parallel. Same house, same bed, different worlds. He kept thinking about Mira. Not constantly, not obsessively, but in quiet moments. Wondering what she was doing. Whether she thought about him. Whether that brief, bright thing had meant anything or if he'd constructed significance out of nothing. But mostly he thought about Sara. About the woman he'd married because it made sense. About the life they'd built that looked perfect from the outside and felt hollow from within. One night, lying next to his wife, feeling the careful distance between their bodies, Daniel had a terrible thought. This is what we chose, and we're going to choose it over and over until one of us is brave enough to stop. He didn't know which would be worse, that bravery or its absence. Sara shifted in her sleep, her hand unconsciously reaching toward him, then stopping, hovering in the space between them before falling back. Even in sleep, they'd learned to keep their distance. Even in sleep, they were honoring the terms. The moment happened on a Thursday in late October. Nothing had been building toward it. No fight, no discovery, just an ordinary evening that revealed itself to be the fault line. Sara was making tea in the kitchen. Daniel was at the table, ostensibly reviewing a document, actually staring at the same paragraph he'd been staring at for 10 minutes. I talked to my mother today, Sara said, her back to him. How is she? Fine. She asked when we're coming for Thanksgiving. What did you tell her? That I'd check with you. She turned around, holding her mug with both hands. But that's not what she really asked about. Daniel looked up. She wanted to know if we're okay, Sara continued. She said I sounded different. Strained. What did you say? I said we're fine. She sat down across from him. But we're not, are we? The question was quiet. Not accusatory. Just factual. No, Daniel said. We're not. Sara nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she already knew. How long have you felt this way? I don't know. Months, maybe. Since when, specifically? He could have lied. Could have kept it vague. But something about the way she was looking at him, sad but clear-eyed, made him tell the truth. Since the project ended. The nonprofit one. Understanding crossed her face. Not anger. Something quieter and more painful. The woman you were working with. Nothing happened. I know. Sara. I know nothing happened, Daniel. That's not what I'm asking. She set down her mug carefully, precisely. I'm asking if something could have. The could have hung in the air like smoke. Yes, he said. She absorbed this. Her face didn't change. Did you want it to? I don't know. Maybe. For a moment. And now? Now I don't see her. Now it's just us. And I keep thinking he stopped. What? I keep thinking that if I felt that with someone else, even for a moment, even just the possibility of it, what does that say about what we have? Sara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady. It says that what we built was stable, not passionate. We knew that going in. But what if stable isn't enough? Enough for what? For a whole life. She flinched slightly. It was the first crack in her composure. I've been thinking too, she said quietly. About us. About whether this is working. And I think we're exactly what we promised to be. Good partners. Respectful. Compatible. She paused. But I don't think we're in love. Not the way people mean when they say that. Hearing her say it out loud felt like watching a structure collapse in slow motion. Inevitable, but still shocking in its finality. Do you want to be? Daniel asked. I don't know if I know how. With me? Or in general? She considered this carefully. I think in general. I think I chose you because I didn't want that kind of intensity. Because I thought it was immature. Unsustainable. And now I wonder if I was just afraid of it. If we both were. They sat with that truth between them. What do we do? Daniel asked. Sara looked at him. Really looked at him. And he saw something in her face he'd never seen before. Not anger or hurt, but clarity. The clarity of someone who'd been doing math in her head for months and had finally arrived at the sum. I think, she said slowly, we have to decide if we're going to try to change what this is or accept that it's what it's always going to be. Can it change? I don't know. Can you look at me and feel what you felt when you were around her? The question was devastating in its simplicity. I don't know, he said honestly. Then that's your answer. They didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't just be postponing the inevitable. Daniel lay in bed that night, Sara beside him, both of them awake, both pretending not to be. He thought about all the moments that had led here. The reasonable conversations. The intelligent compromises. The choice to build something stable instead of chasing something uncertain. They'd done everything right. And somehow, that was exactly what had gone wrong. Friday morning, Sara got up early. Daniel heard her in the shower, then in the kitchen. He lay in bed, knowing he should get up, knowing the day was starting, unable to move. She came back into the bedroom, already dressed. We need to talk. Actually talk. Okay. Not now? I have meetings. But tonight. No laptops, no phones. Just us. He nodded. She left for work. Daniel eventually got up, went through the motions of his morning routine, drove to the office. He sat through meetings, responded to emails, performed his competence. But all day, he felt like he was waiting for a verdict he already knew. Sara came home at 6:30. She'd brought takeout from the Thai place they both liked. They ate at the table in near silence. After, she cleared the dishes. Daniel watched her move through the kitchen, efficient and familiar, and felt a wave of something that might have been grief. "Okay," she said, sitting back down. "We need to be honest. Completely honest. All right. When you think about our future, 10 years from now, 20, are you happy?" Daniel forced himself to really consider it. Not to give the answer he thought he should give, but the true one. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think I am." Sara's face didn't change, but her hands tightened around her mug. "Because of me? Because of us? Because of what we are together? Which is what? Safe, compatible, functional, but not fulfilling." "No." She nodded slowly. "I feel the same way." The admission should have hurt more. Instead, it felt almost relieving. "I love you," Sara said. "I do. But I think I love you the way you love a good friend. Someone you trust and respect. Not the way you're supposed to love the person you married." "I know. And I think," her voice caught slightly, "I think we both knew that from the beginning. We just thought it would be enough. It should be enough. But it's not." She looked at him directly. "Is it?" "No." The word hung there. "Final. True." Sara took a shaky breath. "So what do we do?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She said it gently, but firmly. "We both know. We've known for months. We just haven't wanted to say it." Daniel felt something breaking inside his chest. Not his heart exactly. More like the architecture of the life he'd built. All the careful plans and reasonable choices, collapsing under the weight of their own sensibility. "Sara, we got married because it made sense," she said. "And now we're going to stay married because leaving makes sense too. Because staying would just be, what? Waiting? Hoping we suddenly feel something we've never felt. Some people make it work. Some people compromise themselves until they don't recognize their own lives." She reached across the table, took his hand. "I don't want that for you. And I don't want it for me." He held her hand. Warm, familiar, the hand he'd held at their wedding, at dinners, across countless ordinary moments. "I'm sorry. Me too. I wanted this to work." "So did I." But wanting isn't the same as feeling. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands across the table, two people who'd chosen each other carefully and wisely, and were now choosing, just as carefully and wisely, to let go. "We should probably talk about logistics," Sara said eventually. "The house, Not tonight." "No, not tonight." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "But soon." "Yeah, soon." That night, they slept in the same bed for what would turn out to be one of the last times. Not touching, but not hostile either. Just two people occupying the same space while living in different futures. Daniel stared at the ceiling, feeling the strange calm that comes after a crisis point. The decision hadn't been made in a moment of passion or anger. It had been made the way they'd made their marriage. Rationally, honestly, with clear eyes. And maybe that was the saddest part. They were ending the way they'd begun, making the smart choice, the mature choice, the choice that prioritized clarity over feeling. Next to him, Sara's breathing eventually evened into sleep. Daniel listened to it, memorizing the sound, knowing it wouldn't be there much longer. He thought about Mira briefly, not with longing, but with a kind of distant gratitude. She hadn't broken his marriage. She'd just shown him what was already broken, what had maybe always been. The real point of no return hadn't been meeting someone else who made him feel alive. It had been marrying someone he'd never felt alive with in the first place. And now, finally, they were both admitting it. The knowing felt like falling and flying at the same time. They told people in November. Not everyone at once. Carefully, in small conversations. Sara's parents first, then his. Friends next. Each time, the same script. We care about each other. We want different things. It's mutual. It's amicable. People asked if there was someone else. They said no, honestly. People asked if they tried counseling. They said it wouldn't change what needed changing. Most people seemed confused. A few seemed knowing, like they'd suspected all along. Sarah's mother cried. His brother said, "Are you sure?" Sarah's best friend said, "Finally." That last one bothered Daniel more than he expected. They decided Sara would stay in the house through December. Daniel moved into a furnished apartment across town. Temporary, impersonal, the kind of place that made no demands on him. The first night there, he stood in the middle of the empty living room and felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief. Just a strange absence where feelings should be. He ordered takeout, ate it on the couch, watched television without registering what was on. His phone buzzed. "Sara, did you remember to take the insurance papers?" He had. "Good. Let me know if you need anything else." Even ending, they were efficient. December was administrative. Lawyers, paperwork, division of assets. They were civilized about all of it. Neither wanted the house, so they agreed to sell. The furniture they split without argument. She took what she'd chosen. He took what he'd chosen. The rest they'd bought together went to whoever wanted it more. One Saturday, they met at the house to sort through things. It felt strange, being there together but not together, moving through rooms that no longer belonged to either of them in the way they once had. Sara was in the bedroom, packing clothes. Daniel was going through the hall closet. He found the card from their first anniversary, the one she'd read at the restaurant, the one that said he appreciated her, that he was glad they'd chosen this. He almost threw it away. Instead, he set it aside on Sara's pile. She emerged with a box of her things. "Find anything interesting?" "Just old cards. I left yours." She nodded. "Thank you." They worked in silence for a while. Then Sara spoke again, her voice careful. "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" Daniel set down the box he was holding. "No. Really. I regret that we weren't what we needed to be for each other. But I don't regret you." She smiled sadly. "That's diplomatic." "It's true. I think I regret it," she said quietly. "Not you, but the choice. I think I knew even then that it wasn't quite right. I just told myself it was smart to ignore that. We both did." "Yeah." She looked around the bedroom, the bed they'd shared, the dresser, the morning fog walls. "I thought I was being mature. Now I think I was just being afraid." "Of what?" "Of wanting something I couldn't control. Of needing someone instead of just choosing them." She looked at him. "Do you think we would have been happier if we'd been braver?" "I don't know. Maybe." "That's not very comforting." "No," he agreed. "It's not." They had dinner together one evening in mid-December. Not romantic, practical. There were financial details to finalize, and it seemed easier to do in person. They met at a chain restaurant, neutral territory. Talked through tax implications and retirement accounts. When the business was done, they both fell silent. "This is strange," Sara said. "What is?" "Sitting across from you like this. Like we're strangers negotiating a contract. Isn't that what we always were?" She flinched slightly. "That's cruel. I didn't mean it to be." "I know, but it is anyway." The waiter brought the check. Daniel reached for it. Sara didn't argue. Outside, in the parking lot, they stood by their separate cars. The night was cold, their breath visible. "Are you okay?" Sara asked. "I don't know. Are you?" "I don't know either." She pulled her coat tighter. "I keep thinking I should feel worse. Like there's something wrong with me because I don't. Maybe there's nothing wrong with either of us. Maybe we just made a mistake, and now we're fixing it." "Do you really believe that?" He thought about it honestly. "I want to." Sara nodded. Then, impulsively, she hugged him. Not long, not desperate, just a hug. The kind you give someone you care about, but are saying goodbye to. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." "You too." She got in her car. He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the night. Then he got in his own car and drove back to his apartment that didn't feel like home. The divorce finalized in February. No contest. No drama. Just signatures and filing fees, and a judge who spent 3 minutes making sure they understood what they were doing. Walking out of the courthouse, Daniel felt untethered. Not free. Just loose, disconnected from the structure that had held him in place. He called his brother that night. "It's done. How do you feel?" "I don't know. That's specific. I thought I'd feel something definitive. Relief or regret or something. But I just feel like I'm waiting." "For what?" "I don't know that either." His brother was quiet for a moment. "Give it time. You don't have to know yet." But Daniel wasn't sure time would provide the clarity everyone seemed to think it would. Some questions didn't have answers. Some mistakes didn't have lessons. Sometimes you just did something that made sense at the time, and then it was over and you had to live with having done it. March arrived. The house sold quickly, good market, good location. Daniel took his half of the proceeds and moved into a better apartment. Still temporary, but less aggressively so. He bought new furniture, not because he needed it, but because he wanted something that was entirely his choice, not a compromise or a coordination. He arranged it in the living room, stepped back, and realized he had no idea if he liked it. He'd gotten good at choosing things that made sense. He'd forgotten how to choose things he actually wanted. One evening in April, almost a year after the project with Mira had ended, Daniel was at a coffee shop working on his laptop when he saw her. She was at the counter, ordering, laughing at something the barista said. She hadn't seen him. His first instinct was to leave, to avoid the complication, the questions, the reminder. But he didn't. He waited. When she turned with her coffee, she saw him. Her expression registered surprise, then something more complex. "Daniel. Hi. How are you?" "Good." "You." "Good." They stood there, strangers who'd almost been something else, both knowing this conversation was inadequate, but not knowing how to make it adequate. "I heard," she said quietly, "about your divorce. I'm sorry." "It's okay. It was the right thing." "Was it?" The question was gentle but direct, vintage Mira. He'd forgotten how she did that. Asked the real question under the polite one. "I think so. I don't know. Ask me in a few years." She smiled slightly. "That's fair." She hesitated. Was it because?" "No," he said, understanding what she was asking. "You weren't the reason. You were just the moment I realized there was a problem." She nodded, seeming relieved. "For what it's worth, you seem better. Lighter, maybe." "Do I?" "Yeah." He didn't feel lighter. But maybe that's what growth looked like from the outside. A convincing performance of progress. "I should go," she said. "But it was good to see you." "You too." She left. He sat back down with his coffee and his laptop and the quiet recognition that seeing her hadn't changed anything. The possibility he'd felt before was gone. Not because anything had happened, but because the moment for it had passed while he was married to someone else. That felt like its own small tragedy. Summer came. Daniel dated, awkwardly, half-heartedly. Apps and first dates and conversations that went nowhere. Everyone seemed to want to know his story, and he didn't know how to tell it in a way that made sense. "So you got divorced because?" "Because we weren't in love." "But you got married anyway?" "We thought love was optional. That partnership was enough." "And it wasn't." "No, it wasn't. People didn't know what to do with that. It didn't fit the narrative of betrayal or incompatibility or someone being wrong. It was just a miscalculation. The dates didn't lead anywhere." He didn't mind. One night in August, Daniel stood on his apartment balcony, looking out at the city. It had been a year since everything started unraveling. A year since the anniversary dinner where he'd first asked Sara if she was happy. He thought about her sometimes. Wondered if she was okay, if she'd found whatever it was she'd been looking for. He thought about Mira less often, but with a kind of wistful curiosity. Not longing, just wondering about alternate paths. Mostly, though, he thought about himself. About the choice he'd made to marry Sara, and the choice they'd made together to end it. Both had been rational. Both had been honest. And both had cost him something he couldn't quite name. Standing there in the dark, Daniel realized the hardest part wasn't the ending. It was the not knowing. Not knowing if he'd wasted years or learned something essential. Not knowing if leaving Sara was brave or just another form of running away. Not knowing if if there was a next time, he'd be any wiser. The city lights glittered below, indifferent to his uncertainty. He finished his drink, went inside, and tried to figure out what to do with all this space he'd created in his life by choosing wisely and losing anyway. 2 years after the divorce, Daniel received a wedding invitation. Sara's. He stared at it for a long time. Cream cardstock, elegant script, her name next to someone else's. A man named Eric. The wedding was in October, at a vineyard upstate. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. I'd understand if you don't come, but I'd like you to be there if you can. S. He RSVP'd yes. The night before the wedding, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, a different bed, in a different apartment, in a life that looked nothing like the one he'd imagined when he was married, and thought about all the ways time had moved forward without his permission. The furnished apartment had eventually become a real one. The awkward dates had led to a few relationships, none of them lasting, none of them quite taking root. His career had continued its upward trajectory. He'd learned to cook more than 3 meals. He'd adopted a cat he hadn't wanted, but now couldn't imagine living without. From the outside, he'd probably seemed fine, recovered, moved on. But some nights, lying in the dark, he still felt like he was waiting for something to begin. The vineyard was beautiful. Rolling hills, perfect weather, that particular kind of autumn light that made everything look like a memory even as it was happening. Daniel arrived alone. He recognized a few faces from Sara's side, her parents, her sister, some friends from their marriage. They greeted him politely, carefully, like someone who'd been sick and might still be fragile. He found a seat near the back. The ceremony started. Sara walked down the aisle in a dress that was nothing like her first wedding dress. This one was softer, less structured, the kind of thing you wore when you were choosing feeling over form. She was smiling, actually smiling, not the composed expression she'd worn at their wedding. This was unguarded, nervous, radiant. Daniel watched her marry Eric, a man he didn't know, would never know, but who was clearly someone Sara had chosen differently than she'd chosen him. During the vows, Sara's voice cracked. Eric squeezed her hands. They both laughed, slightly embarrassed, utterly present with each other. And Daniel understood, sitting there watching it, what he and Sara had never been. They'd been careful with each other, kind, respectful, but never reckless, never vulnerable enough to crack at their own wedding. At the reception, Daniel stayed at his table, nursing a drink, watching Sara move through the room. She looked happy. Not content, not satisfied, happy. The kind that came from risk, from choosing something uncertain and having it turn out right. He should have felt relieved for her. And he did, somewhere under everything else. But mostly, he felt the weight of understanding arriving too late. You came. Sara was standing beside his table. Up close, he could see how different she looked. Not older exactly, just more herself. I did. Thank you. She sat down across from him. I wasn't sure you would. I'm glad you're happy. I am. She said it simply, factually, the way she used to say things in their marriage. But now it meant something entirely different. Are you? It was the question she'd asked him countless times before. He'd always said yes. Always meant it, or thought he did. Now he considered it honestly. I'm okay, he said. I'm figuring it out. She nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. It takes time. How did you know, he asked. With him. How did you know it was different? Sara looked across the room at Eric, who was laughing with his groomsmen. I knew because it scared me. Because I didn't feel in control. Because I kept thinking I should run, and I couldn't make myself do it. She looked back at Daniel. With you, I never wanted to run. But I also never felt like I'd fall if I stayed still. And that's what you needed. Yes, I think it is. She paused. I think we were both so afraid of falling that we never learned to fly. The metaphor was unlike her. But then, maybe this version of Sara was unlike the Sara he'd known. Maybe she'd always been there, underneath the caution. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For not being brave enough. You were plenty brave. You left. That took courage. But I was never brave with you. When it mattered. Sara reached across the table, touched his hand briefly. Neither of us was. That's not just on you. Eric was approaching. Sara stood, smoothed her dress. I should get back. Of course. Congratulations, Sara. Really. Thank you. She hesitated. I hope you find it, Daniel. Whatever it is you're looking for. Yeah, he said. Me too. She walked away, back to her new husband, her new life, her new chance at getting it right. Daniel stayed for another hour, then quietly left. Driving home, he thought about the first time Sara had asked him if he was happy. That dinner, years ago now, when she'd said they were doing well. He'd believed her then. They had been doing well, by every measure that mattered to them at the time. But doing well wasn't the same as doing right. And right wasn't something you could logic your way into. The next morning, Daniel woke up in his apartment, made coffee, fed the cat, stood at the window watching the city wake up. His phone had a text from his brother. How was it? He typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on. Fine. She seems happy. His brother replied, Good. How about you? Daniel stared at the question for a long time. The honest answer was complicated. He was fine most days. He'd built a life that functioned. He had work he was good at, friends he saw occasionally, hobbies he'd picked up to fill time. But he still felt like he was living in the wake of a choice he'd made carefully and wrongly. He'd married Sara because it made sense. He'd left her for the same reason. Both decisions had been intelligent, mature, rational. Both had been mistakes. Not because Sara was wrong for him, though she was. Not because he'd been wrong for her, though he had been. But because he'd approached love like it was a problem to be solved instead of a risk to be taken. He'd wanted safety. He'd gotten it. And it had cost him everything safety was supposed to protect. Later that week, Daniel was at a bookstore. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wandering the aisles, letting time pass. He found himself in the poetry section, picked up a collection at random, opened to a page. The poem was about regret. Not the loud kind, the kind that announced itself. The quiet kind, the kind that settled into your bones and lived there, patient, permanent. He bought the book. Months passed, then a year, then another. Daniel dated someone for 6 months. A woman named Julia who was kind and funny and had no interest in marriage, which felt safe until it felt limiting. They ended it amicably. She said, You're not really here, you know. You're always somewhere else. She was right. He was always somewhere else. In the past, he couldn't change. In the future, he couldn't see. In the space between what he'd chosen and what he'd wanted. On what would have been his 5th anniversary with Sara, Daniel found himself thinking about their wedding. The vows they'd written. The promises they'd kept and the promises that hadn't mattered. I promised to choose you deliberately. He had. They both had. And that deliberateness had been the problem. Love, he understood now. Too late, uselessly, wasn't supposed to be deliberate. It was supposed to be inevitable, irrational, the kind of thing that made you rearrange your life not because it made sense, but because you couldn't imagine doing anything else. He and Sara had built a marriage on logic, and logic, it turned out, was a terrible foundation for a life. Sometimes, late at night, Daniel allowed himself to wonder about alternate versions of his story. The one where he'd been braver with Sara, where he'd said, I don't feel what I'm supposed to feel before they got married instead of after. The one where he'd taken the risk with Mira, where he'd said, I can't stop thinking about you, and seen what happened. The one where he'd learned earlier what he knew now, that safety was overrated, that security was a cage if you built it carefully enough, that the smart choice and the right choice were sometimes opposites. But those were fantasies. Useless ones. This was the version he lived in. Divorced at 38, alone at 40, understanding everything too late to do anything about it. One evening in November, 3 years after Sarah's wedding, Daniel was walking home from work. The air was cold, the sky that particular shade of blue-gray that made him think of Sarah's walls, morning fog. He passed a couple on the street. Young, maybe mid-20s, arguing about something trivial, both laughing even as they disagreed. The woman pushed the man playfully. He caught her hand, pulled her close, kissed her temple. It was nothing, a moment between strangers. But Daniel felt it like a wound. Not because he wanted what they had exactly, but because he recognized that ease, that unself-consciousness, that ability to be messy and present and alive with another person. He and Sara had never had that. They'd had coordination, compatibility, respect. They'd never had the kind of love that made you forget to be careful. And now he was 40, and alone, and the window for learning how to love recklessly was closing, if it hadn't already closed. That night, Daniel sat on his couch, the cat curled against his leg, and let himself feel the full weight of his regret. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that drove you to grand gestures or life changes. The quiet kind. The kind that settled in and stayed. The regret of choosing wisely and losing anyway. The regret of being smart instead of brave. The regret of building a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt empty from within. He'd done everything right. He'd been honest, respectful, mature. He'd made choices he could defend, and none of it had been enough. Because he'd forgotten, or never known, that love wasn't supposed to make sense. It was supposed to terrify you. It was supposed to be the one irrational thing you did on purpose, and he'd been too careful to let it. The cat stirred, stretched, resettled. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, Daniel sat in the dark, holding his regret like something precious and painful, something he'd earned and couldn't put down. He thought about Sara, happy with Eric. He thought about Mira, living a life he'd never be part of. He thought about himself, still waiting, still wondering if he'd ever learn how to choose with his heart instead of his head. The answer wasn't clear. Maybe it never would be. Some mistakes you made carefully. Some regrets you carried quietly. Some lessons arrived too late to change anything except how you understood what you'd lost. Daniel sat with that understanding, let it settle into his bones, and tried to figure out how to live in a life he'd chosen correctly and ruined anyway. The night deepened. The regret stayed. And somewhere in the space between wisdom and foolishness, Daniel finally understood what he'd been too smart to see before. Security was easy. Love required risk. And he'd chosen safety over the only thing that mattered. Now he knew. Now it was too late. Now all he could do was carry that knowing forward into whatever came next, older and wiser and lonelier for it. The city lights glittered through his window. The cat purred against his leg, and Daniel sat in the quiet resonance of a choice made sensibly, and a life lived carefully, and a love that had never quite been love at all. It stayed with him. It would always stay with him. Some things you learned too late to change. Some things you just had to learn to live with. If this kind of quiet regret feels familiar, the sense that you chose right and lost anyway, you're not alone. There are more stories like this here, about the choices we make when we're trying to be smart, and what we learn when it's too late to undo them. Stay with StoryQuell TV. Subscribe for stories that sit quietly with the truths we don't outgrow. Sometimes the most careful decisions leave the deepest marks.